Chapter 4 of Blackbeard Buccaneer. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carlos Recio. Title by Ralph D. Paine. Chapter 4. The Captive Seamen in the Forecastle. Jack Cockrell was seasick. This was enough to spoil any adventure. Curled up under a boat, the spray pelted him, and the wild motion of the ship sloshed him back and forth. He took no interest even in piracy. Joe Hawkridge, tough as whipcord and seasoned to all kinds of weather, came clawing his way aft, while the water streamed from his thin shirt and ragged breeches. The pirates of the prize crew had sought shelter wherever they could find it. The waist of the ship was flooded with breaking seas. A few of the larboard watch were huddled forward, close to the lofty forecastle, where they were stationed as sentries over the imprisoned sailors of the Plymouth Adventure. The commotion of the wind shrieking in the rigging and the horrid crash of the toppling combers were enough to convince a landlubber that the vessel was doomed to founder. But Joe Hawkridge clapped young Jack an affectionate clout on the ear and bawled at him. "For his work he's never loth, and a pleasuring he'll go, though certain sure to be popped off, yo-ho, with the rum below." Jack managed to fetch a sickly smile of greeting, but had nothing to say. Joe snuggled down beside him and explained, "I wouldn't dare sing that song if Blackbeard's bullies could hear me. 'Tis known as Stede Bonnet's ditty, for a fight or a frolic." "By Harry, they can roll it out. My blood tingled when they chorused it through Charlestown," said Jack, with signs of animation and a sparkle in his eye. "Tell me truly, Joe, what about this pirate sailing master Ned Rackham? He seems a different sort from your other drunken wretches. He is more like one of Captain Bonnet's choosing." "Gulled you, has he?" cried Joe. "I was afeard of that. And he's getting on the blind side of your skipper. This Captain Jonathan Welsby is brave enough and a rare seaman, but he's never dealt with a smooth rogue like Ned Rackham. He stays sober to plot for his own advantage. He will serve Blackbeard only till he can trip him by the heels. Now listen well, Jack. Seasick though ye be, you will have to warn your skipper, Captain Welsby." "Warn him of what? My poor head is so addled that I can fathom no plot. How can Ned Rackham do us mischief while this infernal gale blows? He toils with might and main for the safety of the ship." "Yes, you dunce, and let a lull come," scornfully exclaimed the boyish pirate. "What then? A fine ship this, and well gunned? She would make a smacking cruiser for Ned Rackham, eh? He hoists a Jolly Roger on his own account and laughs at Blackbeard." "Take our ship for his own?" faltered Jack, his wits confused. "I never thought of that. Why, that means getting rid of us, of the passengers and crew." Joe passed a hand across his throat with a grimace that said more than words. "He has the ship's company disarmed and helpless, Jack, and pirates aplenty to work her till he recruits a stronger force. All hands of them have a surfeit of Blackbeard's bloody whims and didos." "And Captain Welsby will be caught off his guard," said Jack, shivering at the aspect of this new terror. "Can he do aught to prevent, unless he is bold enough to forestall it?" answered the shrewd young sea waif. "Better die fighting than be slain like squealing rats." "Recapture the ship ere Ned Rackham casts the dice," said Jack. "But it means playing the hazard in the midst of this storm. How can it be done? A forlorn venture. It can't but fail." "You're as good as dead if you don't," was Joe's sensible verdict. Jack Cockrell forgot his wretched qualms of mind and body. The trumpet call of duty invigorated him. He was no longer a useless lump. The color returned to his cheek as he crawled from under the boat and shakily hauled himself to his feet. Joe Hawkridge nodded approval and exhorted, "A stiff upper lip, my gallant young gentleman. Steady she goes, and not too hasty. Ned Rackham is as sharp as a whetted sword. Where ye, boy, lest he pick up the scent, fetch me word, here, beneath this jolly boat." Jack stole away, staggering along the high poop deck until he could cling to the lifeline stretched along the roof of the great cabin. There he slumped down in feigned helplessness, banged against the bulwark as a dripping heap of misery, or kicked aside by the pirates of the watch as they were relieved at the steering tackles. From half-closed eyes he watched Ned Rackham, a vigilant, dominant figure in a tarred jacket and quilted breeches and long sea boots. Now and again he cupped his hands and yelled in the ear of Captain Welsby, whose beard was grey with brine. Jack saw that it was hopeless to get a private word with the skipper on deck. The clamour of the storm was too deafening. The one chance was to intercept him in the cabin, when he went below for food and drink. Jack dragged himself to the after hatchway, which was shoved open a trifle to admit air, and squeezed himself through. Before he tumbled down the steep staircase, he turned to glance at Captain Welsby. Unseen by Ned Rackham, the boy raised his hand in a furtive, beckoning gesture. The pirates had taken the main room of the after-house for their own use, driving the passengers and ship's officers into the small cabins or staterooms. The air was foul below, reeking of the bilges, and the main room was incredibly filthy. The pirates ate from dirty dishes, they had scattered food about, and they kicked off their boots to sleep on the floor like pigs in a sty. Several of them were seated at the long table, bottle and mug in hand, and the gloomy place was poorly lighted by a swinging whale oil lamp. Jack Cockerell crept unnoticed into a corner and was giddy and almost helpless with nausea. It seemed ages before Captain Welsby's legs appeared in the hatchway, and he came down into the cabin, bringing a shower of spray with him. His kindly face was haggard and sad, and he tottered from sheer weariness. Passing through to his own room, a scurvy pirate hurled refuse food at him with a silly laugh, and others insulted him with the foulest epithets. He paid them no heed, and they returned to their own amusements. Jack Cockerell aroused himself to stumble after the skipper, who halted to grasp the lad by the shoulder and shove him headlong into the little room. The door was quickly bolted behind them. A lurch of the vessel flung Jack into the bunk, but he managed to sit up, holding his head in his hands, while he feebly implored. "Did you note me wave my hand, sir, when I came below?" "Yes, and I followed as soon as I could," answered the master of the Plymouth Adventure. "There was a hint of secrecy in your signal, Jack. What's in the wind?" "I am the only passenger to win the confidence of one of Blackbeard's crew," explained the lad. "This Joe Hawkridge is true to us, I'll swear it. He is a pressed man, hating his masters. He bids me tell you that Ned Rackham will seize the ship for his own as soon as ever the wind goes down." Is he as bold as that?" grunted the skipper, rubbing his nose with an air of rueful surprise. "No honor among thieves, Jack. I thought him loyal to Blackbeard. I have considered attempting something of my own, when the weather permits, but this news quickens me. This young imp o' Satan, that ye call Joe, he will side with us in a pinch?" "Aye, sir, and he knows his Ned Rackham well. There has been talk among the pirates of rising against Blackbeard to follow the fortunes of sailing Master Rackham. Here is the ship, as Joe says." "It has a plausible sound," said Captain Welsby. "My intention was to wait, but I shall have to strike first." "Can we fight in this storm, sir, even if we manage to release our sailors?" asked Jack, very dismally. "Not what we can, but what we must do," growled the stubborn British mariner. "The shame of striking my colours rankles like a wound. God helping me, we shall wipe out that stain if we drown in a sinking ship. I talk to you as a man, Master Cockerell, for such you have proven yourself, and who else is there to serve me in this adventure?" "To set our sailors free, you mean, sir?" eagerly exclaimed Jack. "I took thought of that. There is nobody but me, neither your mates nor the passengers, who can pass among the pirates without suspicion. The knaves have humoured me, hearing the tale of the pirate I knocked on the head, and my braggart remark to Blackbeard. They have seen me about the decks with Joe Hawkridge as my boon comrade. 'Tis their fancy that I am likely to enlist." "Well said, Jack," was the skipper's compliment. "Yes, you might make your way forward without interference, but the forecastle hatches are stoutly guarded. Again, should my brave fellows find exit, they are weaponless, unready. Moreover, they have been crammed in that dark hole, drenched by the sea, cruelly bruised by the tossing of the ship, and weakened for lack of food and air." "Granted, sir," sighed Jack. "But if some message could be smuggled in to forewarn them of the enterprise, would that brace them to the assault?" "Will you try it, Jack?" asked the skipper, with a note of appeal in his hearty voice. "I know not where else to turn. You take your life in your hands, but—" The shipmaster broke off with a grim smile. It was absurd to prate off life or death in such a strait as this. The boy reflected before he said, If I fail, sir, Joe Hawkridge will try to pass a message in to the men. You can depend on it." "A last resort, Jack. You vouch for him, but I trust you far sooner. He has kept sorry company." "When is the best hour, Captain Welsby?" "Just before nightfall, when the watches will be changing. I dare not delay it longer than that. In darkness my lads will be unable to find the foe and strike hard and quick. Nor can they rush to lay hold of the only weapons in their reach, the pikes in the racks beside the masts. Not a pistol or cutlass amongst them, and they may fight with those wicked dogs of pirates who think not of killing men." "Let your lusty sailors once get clear, sir," stoutly declared Jack Cockerell, "and they will play a merry game with those long pikes. Then I am to slip the message written by your hand on a bit of paper?" "That's it. I will command them to pound against the scuttle, 3 raps for a signal of response, and you must listen for it. Then it is for them to stand ready, on the chance that you can slip the bar of the hatch or the bolts on the door." "But if they have to come out singly, sir, and the sentries are ready-witted, why, your men may be cut down or pistoled in their tracks." "I am so aware," said Captain Welsby, his honest features glum, "but we cannot change the odds." He found an inkhorn and quill and laboriously wrote a few lines on a leaf torn from the back of a sea-stained logbook. Jack tucked it carefully away, and thus they parted company, perhaps to meet no more in life. Through the waning afternoon, Jack stowed himself on deck and held long converse with Joe Hawkridge when they met between the keel chocks of the jolly boat. Because he shared not the skipper's feeling of distrust, Jack sought the active aid of his chum of a pirate lad. It was agreed that they should endeavor to reach the forecastle together when the ship's bell tolled the hour of beginning the first night watch. Joe hoped he might decoy or divert the sentries. If not, he had another scheme or two. A gunner's mate of the prize crew had sent him to overhaul the lashings of the battery of 9-pounders which were ranged along the waist. With several other hands, Joe had made all secure, because the guns were apt to get adrift in such weather as this and plunge to and fro across the deck like maddened beasts. Now Joe Hawkridge had lingered, on pretext of making sure that one forward gun could be fired, if needs be, as a distress signal should the ship open her seams or strike upon a shoal. He had satisfied himself that the tompion or wooden plug which sealed the muzzle was tight, and that no water had leaked through the wrapping of tarred canvas which protected the touch-hole. Before replacing them, he had made 2 or 3 trips to the deck-house amidships, in which was the carpenter's room. Each time, he tucked inside his shirt as many forged iron spikes, bolts, and what not as he could safely carry. Unobserved, he shoved this junk down the throat of the 9-pounder and wadded it fast with handfuls of oakum. He worked coolly, without haste, as agile as a monkey when the ship careened, and the sea spurted through the cracks of the gun ports. Well pleased with this task, he said to himself, with that grin which no peril could obliterate, "God alone knows how I can strike fire to a match and keep it alight, but the sky shows signs of easier weather." The fury of the storm had, indeed, diminished. It might be a respite before the wind hauled into another quarter and renewed its ferocious violence, but the air was no longer thick with the whirling smother of foam and spray, and the straining topmasts had ceased to bend like whips. The ship was gallantly easing herself of the waves which broke aboard, and the rearing billows astern were not threatening to stamp her under. It lacked almost an hour of nightfall when Jack Cockerell crept along the poop and halted to lean against the timbered railing by the mizzen shrouds. All he could think of was that Ned Rackham might seize upon this sudden abatement of the gale to hasten his own wicked conspiracy and so ruin the plan to restore the Plymouth Adventure to her own lawful company. This menace had occurred to Captain Jonathan Welsby, who stood tense and rigid at the sailing master's elbow, watching him from the tail of his eye. Relief overspread the skipper's worn features when he espied Jack Cockerell, who stood as if waiting for orders. A nod, a meaning glance, and they understood each other. Striving to appear unconcerned, Jack moved toward the forward part of the ship. He was aquiver with excitement, and his breath was quick and small, but the sense of fear had left him. Captain Welsby had called him a man, and by God's sweet grace he would so acquit himself. The pirates were swarming out of the cabin to taste the clean air and limber their cramped muscles. The ship still wallowed as she ran before the wind, and it was breakneck work to clamber about. From the topsail yards fluttered mere ribbons of canvas where the reefed sails had bellied. Ned Rackham shouted for the watch to lay aloft and cut the remnants clear and bend new cloths to keep her from broaching to. Jack Cockerell's heart leaped for joy. At least a dozen of the most active pirates would have to obey this order. This would remove them from the deck for a precious interval of time. He slouched aimlessly nearer the forecastle, stretching his neck to gaze up at the pirates as they footed the ratlines and squirmed over the clumsy tops. Joe Hawkridge joined him, as if by chance, and they wandered to the lee side of the forecastle. There, they were screened from the sight of the sentries. The wooden shutters of the little windows had been spiked fast on the outside, and Jack was at his wits' end to find by what means he might slip the fateful message to the captive seamen. He dared not climb upon the roof and seek for a crack in the hatchway. This would make him too conspicuous. Cautiously, he stole around the massive structure and was all but washed overboard when he gained the windward side, where the water broke in hissing cataracts. So great had been its force during the height of the storm that one of the shutters had been splintered and almost crushed in. Clutching the bit of paper, which was tightly rolled and wrapped in a square of oiled linen, Jack pushed it through a ragged crevice in the shutter. It was gravely doubtful whether the men would discover the message in the gloom of their prison. It might fall to the floor and be trampled unperceived. And yet Jack Cockerell could not make himself believe that deliverance would be thwarted. He said a prayer and waited with his ear against the wall of the forecastle. There he leaned through an agonized eternity as the slow moments passed. It was like the ordeal of a condemned man who hopes that a blessed reprieve may save him, in the last hour, from the black cap and the noose. Up aloft, the pirate seamen were slashing the torn canvas with their dirks and casting loose the gaskets. Presently, they began to come down to the deck one by one. Some whispered word must have passed amongst them, because they drifted aft as by a common impulse, although it was not yet the hour to change the watch. Their gunner's mate, a gigantic mulatto with a broken nose, went to the poop when Ned Rackham crooked his finger, and these two stood aside, beyond earshot of Captain Welsby, while they conferred with heads together. "They will strike first," Jack whispered to himself. The misty daylight had not darkened. The decks were not yet dusky with the shadows which Jack had hoped might enable him to approach the forecastle door in his brave endeavour to unbar it. The plans were all awry. Tears filled his eyes, and then there came to his ear a muffled knock against the other side of the forecastle planking. Once, twice, thrice, the signal was unmistakable. A little interval, and it was repeated. Softly, the trembling lad tiptoed to the corner of the forecastle house and peered around it to look for the sentries. Two of them had moved a few yards away to join a group which gazed aft, as if expecting a summons from Ned Rackham on the poop. The third sentry leaned against the forecastle door, a cutlass at his belt. He was a long, bony man with a face as yellow as parchment from the Spanish fever, and it was plain to read that there was no great strength in him. Faithful Joe Hawkridge sat astride the breech of the 9-pounder at which he had been so busily engaged earlier in the afternoon. He appeared to be an idler who merely looked on, but he was watching every motion, and that hard, canny face of his had, for once, forgot to grin. Releasing a 3-foot handspike from its lashing beside the gun carriage, he awaited the next roll of the deck and deftly kicked this handy weapon. It slid toward the forecastle, and Jack Cockerell stopped it with his foot. There was no time for hesitation. Snatching up the iron-shod handspike, Jack rushed straight at the forecastle door. Just then the ship lurched far down, and he was shot headlong, like falling off the roof of a house. He had the momentum of a battering ram. The sentry yelled, and drew his cutlass with a swiftness amazing in a sick man. His footing was unsteady, or Jack would have spitted himself on the point of the blade. As he went crashing full tilt into the man, the impact was terrific. They went to the deck together, and the handspike spun out of Jack's grasp. There was no need to swing it on this luckless pirate, for his bald head smote a plank with a thump which must have cracked it like an egg. Not even pausing to dart after the cutlass, which had clattered from the lifeless fingers, Jack spun on his heel and wrenched at the heavy bar across the forecastle door and felt it slide from the fastenings. He tugged it clear and swung himself up to the roof to draw the bolts which secured the hatch. Rusted in their sockets, they resisted him, but he spied a pulley block within reach and used it as a hammer. All this was a matter of seconds only. The pirates grouped amidships had been waiting for Ned Rackham's word from aft, and they were muddled by the sudden shift of action. The other sentries stared in foolish astonishment. The brief delay was enough to let Jack Cockerell free the hatch. While he toiled furiously, several pistols and a musket were snapped at him, but the flint sparked on damp powder in the pans, and only one ball whistled by his head. Out of the forecastle hatchway and through the door, the enraged sailors of the Plymouth Adventure came rocketing like an explosion. They stumbled over each other, emerging head or feet first, blinking like owls in the daylight, but with vision good enough to serve their purpose. Their goal was the nearest stand of boarding pikes at the foot of the mainmast, but as they came surging on deck, they were not empty-handed. In the forecastle was a bricked oven for warmth in winter and for cooking kettles of soup. This they had torn to pieces, and every man sallied forth with a square, flat brick in each hand and more inside his shirt. Those who were first to gain the deck pelted the nearest pirates with these ugly missiles. The air was full of hurtling bricks, and the earliest casualty was a stout buccaneer who stopped one with his stomach. Driven back in yelling confusion, the pirates found their firearms almost useless, so drenched had the whole ship been by the battering seas, but they were accustomed to fighting it out with the cold steel, and they were by no means a panicky mob. The fusillade of bricks held them long enough for the merchant sailors to escape from the forecastle, and this was an advantage more precious than Captain Welsby had hoped for. What the pirates required was a leader to rally them for attack. Quicker than it takes to tell it, Ned Rackham had raced along the poop and leaped to the waist at peril of breaking his neck. Agile, quick-witted, he bounded into the thick of it, cutlass in hand, while he shouted, "At him, lads, and give the dogs no quarter." With hoarse outcry, his gallows birds mustered compactly, while those who had been in the cabin came scampering to join them. Curiously enough, Captain Jonathan Welsby had been forgotten. He was left alone to handle the ship, while the pirate helmsman stood by the great tiller. To forsake it meant to let the vessel run wild and perhaps turn turtle in the swollen seas, and so the doughty skipper was, for the time, a looker-on. And now, with Ned Rackham in the van, it seemed that the British sailors were in a parlous plight, and that their sortie must fail. Craftily, the pirates maneuvered to drive them back into the forecastle, and there to butcher them like sheep. End of Chapter 4.